Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, your podcast where game design and storytelling meet at the hearthfire. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today we're digging into the roots of inclusive design with a guest who brings both creative brilliance and community advocacy to the table. Elaine Gómez is a game designer and educator whose work bridges game mechanics with justice, culture, and equity. She's also a co-founder of Latinx in Gaming, a passionate advocate for inclusive game development, and someone who truly believes in using games as a force for good. Our focus today is on how indie studios, passionate, bold, and nimble, can embed inclusive, culturally informed design into their games right from the prototype stage. So, pull up your chair and let's get into this. Elaine, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me, Gerald.
I am so delighted that you said you would sit down and chat with me today. I want to talk to you about all kinds of things, but today we're going to focus on indie studios and designing with inclusivity in mind. So that sounds like a lot of fun, but before we dig into it, I always want to hear the origin story. How did you fall in love with gaming? How did you get into what you do? What was your career path like? Just give us a little bit of, where did Elaine come from?
Where did Elaine come from? So I'm like a lot of my peers and my friends in the industry. I had no idea that game design or game development was a viable career path. In my household, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, so I am pure Boricua. My father is Dominican, so I'm half and half. But in our community and in the country, that's not something that is, I don't know, something that you talk about. Like games are a hobby, games are something that you do for fun, but they're not something that you go to school for to get a degree and have a career with. So it was never part of the conversation because I was never exposed to it. But both of my parents were in technology, in the technology field. So I was at least exposed to computers and software and even hardware at a really early age. And I was able to see all of that stuff. So I really wanted to get into medicine to help people. So that, again, track of mind was nothing to do with games. I loved playing games, and I enjoyed the co-op games because I have two younger brothers. So that was a way that we were able to play together a lot, was with our N64s. And that was a lot of fun growing up. But I wanted to study medicine, and I ended up choosing a different career path in college. I decided that was just not for me. I didn't like the curriculum. I didn't like how sacrificed the life would have to be in order to get there. So I changed my mind, and the first thing that was available to me when I spoke to my dean, I told her I do not want to be a super senior, so I do not want to stay stuck doing my bachelor's for 5 to 6 years and like just literally burn money. What can I do so that I can still graduate fairly on time? It's okay if I'm like a semester behind and maybe even a year behind. What can I do? And at the time, it was a fairly new major called information technology at the school. And little did I know that the school that I was at was one of the top schools for this new like emerging major. And I decided to pursue that, and I switched from the general biomedical engineering that I was pursuing with pre-med track into information technology. And in that curriculum was where I learned a little bit about game design and game development. And it wasn't so much the craft of design, it was really the almost like the social sciences behind it. So like how are people's like psyches changing when they play games? Like what is the impact of games inside a society, like lawmaking and digital rights and all of these things, like really interesting conversations around games as a digital property and like how these things are like impacting society. And those classes were all taught by the same professor. And he was, to this day, and I always tell this story because it's really important it really formed who I am and like even till extends to Latinx and gaming. His name is Dr. Joe Sanchez, the professor who taught all those courses. And he was my only professor in my entire graduate and undergraduate career that was Latino heritage. And he really just took me under his wing. He saw a lot of potential in me. And he asked me, hey, have you ever even thought about going into game design and game development as a career? Even going to graduate school, if you don't feel that you're ready enough to go, I can definitely write you a letter of recommendation. I can perhaps send you some resources so that you could look into it and see if that's something that you want to do. And graduate school is not something that I even crossed my mind. I was like, going back to school after almost finishing school doesn't sound like a lot of fun. But I definitely took it to heart. I took his advice to heart. And I took all the resources that he gave me and I decided to pursue one of them, which was a research institute. And he wrote me a recommendation letter for. And in that research institute, it was over a summer in 2012 to 2013, where I, along with other college students from different states in the country, we wrote a paper in a topic of our interest. And the topic that we landed on was on gender roles inside the games industry. And around that same time, like things just fell into place. Unfortunately, it was right around Gamergate where all this conversation around women shouldn't be in games was happening, and like certain games are not games because they talk about certain topics that are not fun, like depression and all of these things. And looking at all that data and all the information that was happening online, we got a lot of really great discourse that we were able to use in that thesis project and that research paper to really argue against why it's important to build up platforms and build up curriculums from the educational standpoint to encourage more women and more people of color to learn STEM careers that could potentially take them to game development and game design, and therefore catch those people in their early career so that they can enter the industry. So that's really where I started. It was really that paper. And I sat down with myself when I got all the resources from Dr. Sanchez about going to graduate school. And I said, okay, there's two things that I can do. I can either, take this paper and archive it and let it just be what it was. Or I can decide to use that as a catalyst to actually make a difference, learn the craft, and try to change this industry from the inside out. And that was a hard mode. And that's exactly what I ended up doing. So I decided to apply to graduate school. Only two schools that I applied to. At the time, USC's games program was one of the top programs in the country. So that's why I had my eyes set on it. And then I also applied to NYU's Game Center program, both great master's programs, but different curriculum, different concentrations of things that they were doing. But I chose NYU because it was closer to home. So my family was based in New Jersey. I could commute back and see my family more often. And that's why I decided to choose those two programs out of like the dozen that were available at the time. And then USC sent me an acceptance letter, NYU rejected me. So that's why I went and packed all my bags and moved across the country with no friends, no support system in California. I was all by myself, but pursuing that dream of wanting to learn this game design as a craft and becoming a game designer, understanding what the principles are so that I could learn the art of what it was to make games and eventually enter the industry. So I was in that program, graduated. It took me about a year and a half before I ended up landing my first game design full-time role. But after graduation, I ended up teaching game design and game development at a college level because that master's degree, one of the things that was enticing for me is that it's considered a terminal degree in the arts. So that means the equivalent of a PhD in the art of game making. So therefore, I can teach game design at a college and a university level, which was nice to me because I was like, yeah, I can give back and I can teach other people these things if I cannot land a job yet. So that's what I did. And then in doing that, I was still applying to work and then doing freelance and contract work as well. So I was really trying to still build up my portfolio while I was teaching, applying to work so that I could get that full time. And then my first job was at Elaine Media as a generalist game designer there. And from then on, I've been in the industry ever since, just climbing that ladder of leadership onto like mid-level to senior, and to principal game designer, and then getting a craft. Just like doctors, honestly, like game designers have become specialized in a branch of game design after several years. And my expertise has landed on gameplay and systems. So that's really what I have done the past 5 years or so. And then I open up my own indie studio. I do projects with friends and all of this stuff, all in tandem. And then I run a nonprofit at the same time. So that it has been like my everything that has been leading up to here. But it's everything has been a domino effect, for sure. So yeah, that's pretty much it. How I got here.
That is one heck of a journey. Do you still teach at all? Do you find time to teach at all and do that?
I wish that I had the time because I really love it. And I love helping young people understand these nuances about game design that you don't read in books, that you really learn by doing. And But with running Latinx in gaming and with having my own side projects and my business and in having work, it's a lot. So I'm not able to teach, but it's one of the things that I would love to get back to one day when perhaps things settle down and I decide what I want to do, whether it is continuing with nonprofit work or going more indie and doing some side projects that I just haven't been able to touch. I really need to figure out what my next 5 years or my next 10 years look like.
Don't we all?
Yes.
I want to dig into the indie game and the inclusive gaming, but a
Yeah.
question I like to ask people about their origins in the world of game is what were there games that stuck out when you were young? And did you play any physical tabletop game, board games that impacted your process or your creative this today even?
Yeah, that's interesting. So with tabletop and board games, again, like growing up, those were not like available to me. Outside of like Monopoly and like the Game of Life and things like that. I was not exposed to like the newer, cooler stuff, to be honest, that I see like nowadays. So it wasn't until I went to graduate school where I was exposed to all of that. Like I didn't even know what D&D was. And people had to explain to me what was Dungeons and Dragons, what were like these adventure type of games that really have influence even digital games to this day, that there was so much stuff that I just didn't grow up with that I wasn't exposed to. So I wish that I would have been exposed to that so that I could have gotten more references when it came to certain design and things like that. So definitely not board games or tabletop games, but digital games, there were a few. So Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was one of those games where it was the first game that I fully immersed myself in and I could spend hours in that world and not know that 8 hours had gone by and I hadn't eaten type of thing. It was one of those games that really left an impact on me. And to this day, I use it as a reference for a lot of game designs and gameplay systems that I generate this day. I look back at some of those design decisions that were made for Ocarina of Time because they are classic and timeless. And you can see the impact that they have had across the board in all genres. So it's definitely a big one that sticks out. And another one that sticks out for me is between Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. Both of those games to me are very experimental, but they rely so much on environmental storytelling and guiding the player by doing instead of prompting you with UI and tutorials. So to me, that has been a huge influence because I'm a very player-centered designer. So I'm always thinking about, well, what is the player going to understand by this system being presented to them? Is it going to be automatically frustrating? Is it going to be confusing? How can we alleviate that just by the way we design it versus adding onto it with tutorialization and UI? So I think both of those games early on, because I was much younger when I got to play them, had a huge influence on me. I was like, wow, how did they teach? How did we learn that in this boss, you learn certain things that you can carry that information into the next boss in Shadow of Colossus? To me, that was just really, really great design. So all those three games are like really foundational, and they're all Japanese too. So I think they're a huge influence as well. Japanese game design is a bit different than Western game design. They prioritize certain things that we do not in the West. And they elevate certain things and they're not afraid to go outside the box to try to do things. And I love that. So I definitely gravitate towards trying to do things a little bit more different, and seeing if it like sticks instead of trying to redo the same system just because that's the status quo and that's how things are done. So yeah, that's definitely those. And I could probably list a few more, but those are ones that are really, really special to me.
Nice. Okay, well let's talk game design. And let's go at it from the angle of inclusive game design and indie studios in it. But let's set the stage here. What, in your opinion, is inclusive design, both from your work in games and your work with Latinx and gaming? How do you define inclusive game design?
Yeah, it's a big one too because it's such under fire right now. And we definitely feel it with the politics and the state of the world. But for me, at the end of the day, when we talk about inclusion, we're talking about being holistic. We do not live in a bubble, or maybe some people do. I definitely do not. But when we talk about being inclusive, you recognize that there are things outside of you and your own sphere of influence that impact the world, and those things create for different experiences for different people. And when you are mindful of that, and when you care about what those things are, then you start to want to have you want to have conversations about these things, and you want to start gravitating towards people who perhaps have a different viewpoint than you, or who have had a different life than you. And then they open up, and you learn so much from it, and then you take all that you can, and you expand your horizons, and you expand your perspectives, and you grow. And to me, that's what inclusive design is all about. When we include other people who are not like us, when we are open to different perspectives, different opinions, and different viewpoints, and we allow all of those things to change and transform how we live life and how we see things in our world, then truly, then we can create art that is more representative and true and authentic to the world that we live in. And that to me, that's what I make certain decisions in the games that I get to design for. And that's also why we make certain decisions even at Latinx and Gaming as a nonprofit. We know that there are certain challenges and problems that the Latin community faces that other people just do not. And we are conscious about those things, and we talk about those things and try to find solutions. But we also know that there's a lot of intertwining of challenges and problems with other communities. So we're friends with Black in Gaming, and we're friends with AAPI in gaming. We're friends with gay gaming professionals. And we talk about these issues that really do ebb and flow between our communities, because we're not a monolith, right? And then in learning, then we can see, okay, so that's how you were able to solve for that problem. Or that's how you were able to discuss it with your community. Let's see how we can modify that so that we can have those same conversations in our community, and see if we can find a solution that works for the people that we serve and the community that we serve. So it's all relative and interconnected. Why? Because we're all human beings. And we cannot separate the art of making games and the entertainment of playing games from the fact that we are humans, and that we're experiencing things, and that we're feeling things. That's all intertwined. So to me, that's what that means. And I don't think anybody has gotten it right. I think we're at a constant, we're constantly evolving, and in a state of growth every single day, and having, at least for me, having my heart open to see, well, what's the new thing that I need to be conscious of and be made aware of, so that I can make sure that I am respecting and I am validating people around me that need it the most. And I think that's what that's all about. So that when that's in your heart and in your mind, like right away, like you can come up with like the simplest design for something right away. You're like, okay, is this accessible? All of a sudden, you start asking all these questions that go so much deeper than the superficial of like, well, I think this mechanic is cool. Then you start seeing, well, can blind gamers find this accessible? Can deaf gamers find this accessible? Is there something that we're saying about this character that perhaps it's not going to be sensitive to a community or a group of people? Okay, let's go back to the drawing board, because we don't want to do that. Or, hey, we don't know enough about this country. Can we find a consultant or somebody that we can talk to so that we can get the right information and do this right? So I think it just becomes ingrained, and you start caring so much more than you would if you didn't have those conversations and you weren't impacted by people around you and the world around you.
There's a question that I've often wondered on this topic, and you're the perfect person to answer it for me. Because I've never been inside of a game dev studio, I've never been in that environment, but I have worked in other creative fields in management roles and at the top of the food chain. And it's important to, like you say, hold space and do your research and bring in consultants. But at the end of the day, I found, and I don't know if this is applicable to game design, that helping people develop and strengthen their basic empathy helped. Like that became a springboard for everything else. Is it similar? Is there work being done in that area to help develop empathy inside of studios?
So I would say that certain studios are going that route, and I have been at studios. I have been employed at studios where we have had leadership training and where emotional intelligence is one of the topics that we talk about. Um, but I wouldn't say that it's a standard at every studio where leadership cares enough or doesn't think that it is as important to have certain conversations around empathy and community building, and being a good human. You will hear a lot because I've also been job hunting the last few months. I have heard a lot of studios say, well, we don't want jerks. Like, we want to have a culture here where people respect each other and we're trying to all come together to make something good. And that's great. That's great to hear. But also, it's really important to have core values that you will be like your strong foundation that you can build on. When those things are shaky or when they're too nuanced, you're going to have a problem because then there's going to be no true definition and borders, or rather, the fine lines between what can be tolerated versus not are more like muddy, right? So, and then you can get yourself into big trouble when like big problems arise and you don't have solutions for it because it's not like you have said, well, we have a charter here, we have a code of ethics that we're following that you all need to follow as well. So I think at bigger companies, that's more common because you have these code of ethics and you have these employee manuals that are written by, the HR folks and the legal folks, all that stuff together. But I think it starts getting a little bit more obfuscated when you go indie and it's a group of friends and things can happen amongst group of friends. We all know that. And things can get even more hairy and more full of tension because they're your friends and you feel more comfortable perhaps to saying, things a little bit more rough or a little bit more open. So even then at that point, I think it's important to have those core values and a certain code of conduct that everybody abides by. But yes, empathy is so incredibly important because like I said, we're all human beings. And if we cannot communicate and understand each other, then how are we going to build things together? It's going to be very, very difficult when we are in completely two different sides of the line, and we're not even willing to open up pathways in order to understand each other. And it's very, very important. And I think after, or rather during COVID, is when we saw it the most, because we were all isolated. Everybody went remote, and we were all getting such digital fatigue from being on Zoom calls or on Google Meets all the time. And I definitely noticed people's emotions getting heightened. It was a lot easier for folks to get frustrated and a lot easier for folks to get angry, even for small things, not even like big problems. And it was all due to that because we were lacking that human to human interaction, we were kind of like drifting, and we just did not understand how to communicate better. And we were so worried about ourselves more so than other people because we were isolated. But I think now that we're starting to get out there more. Unfortunately, yes, there's a lot of like return to office policies moving around the industry, which I don't agree with because that's not accessible to a lot of folks. But that has also helped where there's a more on-sites and people are seeing each other. And I think it helps build that camaraderie and that sense of community that we need as game developers to create art and to work on a team. Right? Because at the end of the day, it's all teamwork based. If we're building in silos, you all as players can see that when something that doesn't fit right, doesn't feel good when things are separated. So it's all relative, and I do wish that it was more standardized, that we would have these conversations about emotional intelligence, empathy. How do we build together? How do we communicate better together? What are different communication styles? Because we all communicate differently. And how does like our lived experience, whether you're an immigrant, whether you are a Latino, whether you are Black, how do these experiences mold the way that we see and talk to each other and how we can use that to our advantage, so that we could really still express ourselves and use our voice, regardless of the spaces that we are in.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. You mentioned indie studios.
Hmm.
What kind of opportunities do indie studios have to bake inclusivity into game design from an early stage? And what are some of the challenges, perhaps, like you mentioned, because I hadn't even thought of that, What are some unique challenges of that indie situation?
Yes, so definitely speaking from experience, because I have my own indie studio where at the end of the day, the biggest advantage that you have is your autonomy and creative freedom, right? Especially if you're self-funding and you're making creative calls on your own. It's such a huge thing to be able to make decisions on the fly and say, okay, that's not going to work, or no, this is not the direction that we want to go in. And it's easier to have these conversations where versus at AAA studios or big AAA projects that I've also had the privilege of being a part of, it takes time in order for information to go up the chain and have somebody of authority make that decision. Sometimes it can take weeks, and that really creates it really halts momentum in creativity because then you have to wait and figure out, well, what am I going to do now because I'm waiting for a call. And that happens a lot, and I've heard many friends from all over the industry say, yes, that's a huge problem. We always have to wait on decisions that need to get made, and we wish that we could just do it quick. So with the indie studios, it's much easier to do that. And when it comes to being inclusive, well, at the end of the day, when you have a smaller studio, it's much easier to build a culture and sustain a culture when you have a smaller group of people. You could really hold people accountable because it's easier to have those conversations. When you have a company of thousands of employees, it's much harder to do that and actually like keep people in check and say, hey, like what happened in this meeting was not right. What can we do to fix it so that we don't communicate like that again? Or like, hey, before you jump the gun on a decision, get buy-in from everybody. What can we do to mitigate that? It's harder to do that when there's like dozens and dozens of people involved and there's a chain of command that you need to abide by. So I think that's like the biggest like a benefit of having an indie space. And at the end of the day as well, it affects process and pipeline. So when you're talking about character creation, when you're talking about world building, these conversations in indie studios happen with everybody, or typically at least in a studio that's healthy and likes collaboration amongst everybody. Everybody has an opportunity to voice their concerns and jot in their notes and give feedback. So as early as concepting the ideas, you can talk about, well, what type of world do we want to build? What are the mechanics that we want to center around? What are the core verbs that we really want to cling to? It's much easier to have those conversations as a team in an indie space to me, where at least I have been able to live it, versus at a bigger studio where somebody else that's in leadership, a director or even executives, make those calls for you, and that information trickles down. And at that point, you're just executing on those decisions versus having a little bit more of a say on how it goes, or perhaps reorienting where that mechanic or that design may go. So yes, so indie has the benefit where you can make those calls for inclusion and think about things on a deeper level very early on versus at bigger studios where that may not be the case because all those conversations happen before that information comes to you.
Wow. Well, let's get crunchy for a second. Let's talk about actual gameplay mechanic design. Do you have like, I mean, I could ask the big question, how do you make sure there's inclusivity and accessibility inside of but let's not do that. Let's say, do you have a tool or a process that you like to use to just not only make sure that your designs are inclusive, but they're fun, like not just inclusive and fun, but fun because they're inclusive? Or, is there a way, do you have a process for that? Or perhaps alternatively, have you seen it done well in something you've done or something somebody else has done?
I would say that for every project is super different. It really depends on the world and the characters and even the genre that you're going for. So I never, regardless of what studio or project I'm on, I'm never using the same approach because it's always very tailored to the project that we are on. However, there are certain questions that I ask from the get about things like accessibility or what is it that we want to say about this game, or what is it that we want to say with this game's design? And those are the types of questions that I try to get answers for from either the design director, the lead director, whoever has a level of authority where I can get those answers from. And then I can disseminate that information to other designers who are perhaps I'm helping lead and guide. So I definitely have a set of those questions, like I mentioned before. But when it comes to my own process, I always have several references that I look at. Every project has at least three references that are core to the game. And those are like your kind of like your mood board, right? Whether it be the world building, the art style, the mechanics, whatever it is, there's always like a set of games that are a reference. For me, I take it a step further and I use those, but then I go beyond that through every single system and mechanic that I'm responsible for. So, for example, if I am in charge of designing the enemy archetypes or the enemy classes for a project, then I look at our overarching three games and I say, cool, let me see how they did their enemies. Great, let me write down those notes. But then I have a different set of references for, well, these are enemy designs where I think they communicate great like auditorily. So for example, a big one that I always go to is the Left 4 Dead 2 enemies. So you have the witch and jockey, and like just by hearing the witch crying from a distance, everybody's like, there's a witch around. So everybody's getting prepared. Same thing with a jockey, and their visual language is also so strong. And there's certain things that I think are such great design that I always carry that with me. That's a reference that I always bring to enemy design. I'm like, this is a great example of what it looks like when you use world building and storytelling and audio. Everything has been packaged properly to make one single enemy. And that feeds into all of them. Another great one is The Last of Us. So you have your clickers, right? And like from the story, why are they called clickers? Well, they can't see, so that's why they're clicking and using echolocation, so they can't see you, so you can walk and stealthily walk by them. But if you make noise, they can come at you, right? So there's like certain things that are just great design again, and I will use that, even though the game that I'm building may be completely different. It's not a survival game or a AAA story-driven game. It's something completely different. But those are like certain design anchors that you could really use as a means to catapult the enemy's design. So that's usually what I do. I have my overarching 2 to 3 titles that I use for the game project, and then when I start getting granular, I start using the references that I think this is great design, and then go even a layer deeper. Well, these are similar mechanics to what we're trying to do, or this is a similar system to what we're trying to do. And here are the games that did really well, and these are the games that did not do so well. Because we need to look at bad examples too, so that we can learn from other mistakes that people have made, so that we don't fall in the same pit. So I like to do that. And from there, then it's really trying to get buy-in from the rest of the team and see, okay, we looked at all these references, good and bad. Here is my approach to the design. Sometimes I'll do 2 designs or 3 designs to really show options to the team and say, at least in my gut, these are the things that I think we should gravitate towards. At the end of the day, we can iterate. We have A, B, and C. Potentially, the good option is A and C, or perhaps it's B and C. Who knows? But at least we have some options, and then we can paper design from that. It's easy to fail fast and fail often. And that's something at USC that I learned in my master's program. You want to fail fast and fail often as early as possible. So in pen and paper, when you're documenting and you're trying things out, it's a lot easier to scrap things out and rescope versus when I go in engine and I tell engineers to build me certain things, and all of a sudden we have all this time and energy and effort that potentially will need to get archived because we didn't think ahead, or we didn't try to find the pros and cons early. So that's what I always try to do. Just try to fail as much as possible in the beginning, so that when we're in time to get into engine, we have a good roadmap and a really solid idea of what it is that we're trying to build. And from then on, it's rather iterating versus trying to go back into the drawing board and seeing if that that idea sticks to the board. We already did that on paper, and we were able to get buy-in, and then that's how we continue. So that's really my process with inclusive design as well. But the questions are a little bit different. Okay, how inclusive do we want it to be? Because it's a spectrum, and depending on your budget, that's also dependent on how far you can take it. With AAA games like The Last of Us or even some Assassin's Creed's Overwatch, we're talking about big teams with big budgets. They can have an entire department dedicated on just accessibility design. And they're designing these suites and all of these things that will help players be able to access the game. But in an indie project, do you have the budget to do that? When only perhaps a singular game designer can make a feature, and then that's as far as they can take it because they don't have the time or they don't have the money. So it's really difficult, and money does play a lot on figuring out whether you can push certain accessibility features or not, because it requires engineering and art and design. And then on the fact with the inclusive design, I always say the designers are not inclusively minded, then you're going to have an issue because you cannot staple things later on and trying to make them inclusive just because you want to have good press or you want to have good community conversations. That comes from inception. So I remember actually being on a project where we were having biracial characters. And from the beginning, I said, what is the choice behind this? Because we need to have some deep conversations about isms when it comes to biracial characters that are living in a predominantly white community, because that's the game that we were building. And I was trying to have really deep conversations early with the art team and the creative director, because that's some big decision making. And you want to make sure that you do it right. So if we're making biracial characters where we know the two communities, we need to talk to people that can speak to the culture around those things, because I am not part of that community. None of us are part of that community. What are we going to do this right and correctly? And also make decisions that make sense, that would be like realistic. So I think that when you care, when you have people on your team who are advocating for those conversations to happen, much easier to talk about them early, before they get implemented. And I have no problem being that person that says we shouldn't make a decision until we know exactly why we are trying to go this route. We should interrogate it. That's something that one of my coworkers, she was the narrative designer for that project, and she would say we have to interrogate. Why is it that we're trying to make this decision? Why is it important to the world that we're building? Why is it important to the characters and all these things? And that stuck with me quite a bit because it's true. You need to analyze why is it that you're making a decision. If it's just because it's cool, that's not a good enough reason to have it in there. It needs to be intentional. It needs to be meaningful. And when you see design that is intentional and meaningful, everything starts to stick, and people feel that in the gameplay experience. But those come up with very hairy conversations.
It sounds like you need to have somebody in a studio, though, who's going to champion those conversations and make that happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, yes. And I have been in teams where everybody's on the same page and nobody's afraid to get in there. And that was such a great experience to be able to have conversations about characters in wheelchairs, for example, in a multiplayer. Well, what are the technical limitations that we have with our team size and, the bandwidth of our engineers? Can we fake it in a sense where we can still have characters in the world who have different disabilities, but perhaps the players do not need to have different devices because that then adds on to the technical challenges. Like these are conversations that I had in a studio in a project that I was a part of. And it was great because everybody cared and everybody wanted to do the right thing. Everybody wanted to see where we could take it. And every department was invested in trying to figure out a solution, whatever that would look like. And I have been part of studios where that was a big no-no, where I would brought up, hey, like, we are targeting a game. We're targeting an environment that is very much based in a specific country. Are we talking about to anybody about the do's and don'ts, right? Because when it comes to architecture, and that project was gearing towards a little bit more Japanese architecture, and I know just from the fact that I enjoyed Japanese culture and Japanese architecture that there are certain materials that Japanese architects use to evoke the organic, to bring the outdoors in. There are certain things that are done by design and by choice. And I was starting to see materials that were not on par with that in the prototypes that we were building. And I was like, hey, have we discussed with anybody about like the realities of like building this architecture and like these materials and all these things? So I want to make sure that we're doing it right, that if somebody from Japan were to see, they'll be like, ah, yes, like that is tried and true to what we do, not like a copy and paste weird thing just because it looks nice. And I was met with opposition where they were like, that's not what we're trying to do here. Like we're not trying to be inclusive or like be thinking about the depth of like cultural like presentation or anything like that. And I was flabbergasted because I was like, well, if that's not the case, then perhaps we shouldn't have this in here. Perhaps we should just have a regular building or regular architecture in a city instead of trying to skew it to something specific where it can eventually become problematic. So I have been on conversations on both ends of the spectrum. And it's not easy when you're trying to be that champion, like you said. But it's so nice when there's multiple champions and everybody's rallying, and everybody wants to do the right thing. It's harder when you're the odd person out and you're the only one trying to fight for something that nobody else cares enough about, or they just don't want to prioritize. And that is a choice. That is absolutely a choice.
It's too bad they don't see that honoring inclusivity and representing everyone makes the world and the game more authentic and real and
Absolutely.
only adds to it. Like there's no downside apart from cost and scope and all that stuff. But
Absolutely. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, hey, if you don't have the resources, and you don't have the right people, then, like you said, scope it down. Cut the things that perhaps are potentially maybe problematic, and you can still find the core of what that thing is and try to build on that core. And just remove the bits that you just don't want to play with fire with. And that can always be done with anything. You can always find alternatives. There's always solutions to something. And at the end of the day, as game developers, we're big problem solvers. Like that's what we do every single day. We're just trying to find different alternatives and solutions to something and iterating and iterating and iterating. So it's like, why not use that same thought process that we use for everything with being inclusive and making sure that we're abiding by like communities, respecting people, being genuine, so that when other people can see it too, they feel themselves in that. Like at the end of the day, like there can be such a huge opportunity for impact that I think that we dismiss because we don't see that far into it. But you don't know who's gonna have that like that game in their hands and be like, wow, I'm so inspired. I'm so happy to see this in front of me. I would have never thought, right? That happened to me with Spider-Man Miles Morales. When you went into the apartment and it was Christmas time in the apartment and it was decorated and you saw the Puerto Rican flag and our traditional foods that we eat during Christmas time on the kitchen counter, like that made some people cry. I saw some streamers that played it and they cried because it's so emotional to see something that's so like special to you. That's part of who you are and your identity being displayed in a game, but it was done so well that it could have like generational impact. You know what I mean? So that was beautiful. So I've seen it done well and can see the outcomes of it. Same thing when Black Panther came out, when that movie came out. So many of my friends, black designers, and game developers, when they got to see it, they're like, I wish that we could build games like this, like big worlds that use like our culture and are futuristic and that are not like embedded with like crime and all of these things that are so often put into people of color communities like GTA and all of these things. Also for Latinos too, because it's the same thing. We're either always cholo gang members or like these very stereotypical characters. But seeing a world like in Black Panther with like full technology all into the future where everybody's trying to help each other and it's all so culturally ingrained, but also like so incredibly modern that it wasn't just like, oh, like we're stuck in like the past, but it's like really looking into the future. I have so many friends who were moved to tears by this world that they saw and they couldn't get enough of it. And that's like impact, right? Representation matters, right? And games do that too, the same way that films do and the same way that books do and animated cartoons. All of it's relative.
That's brilliant. I honestly, that's the kernel right there. That's the core of it. I So well said. Honestly, I don't think I have anything else to add on the core topic. Like that, I had a couple more questions that would try to get us there, but you just walked right into it. Like that was great.
Thank
That's
you.
wow.
No, definitely have had a lot of time to think about these things, and have talked to so many folks about the nuances and the intricacies of like navigating these conversations, especially right now in 2025. It's not easy, but at the end of the day, we're really as designers and devs trying to just make good stuff, but also things that make people like think outside the box. Like I'm not out here trying to just make the same old, and I don't think players want that either. I think we're coming to a point where people are demanding to see newer things, and it's not fun anymore to just do the same formula, the business formula that has worked the past 10, 15, 20 years. I think we are ready for new stories and to explore new worlds and new characters that offer us something a little bit different to absorb. And that means that we need to get out of our comfort zone. Change doesn't come about just like on your lap, you just sit and it just falls from the sky. You have to be very active in the decisions that you're making and you're going to get pushed back, but that's okay. Because it's in that ebb and flow that we can really push boundaries and make good things happen. Nothing good comes by lack of fighting, right? Everything that we have that is good, we fought for in our lives. You know what I mean? In the world, that's just how things are. But I really believe in that. I really think that we can take things to the next level in a very good way and really offer the world something new with the games and the stories that we're telling. We just haven't tapped into those yet because there's restrictions and challenges and all of these things. But I would love to see more indigenous stories in digital games. I would love to see folklore and more games that talk about certain like countries that we would never see games set in. You know what I mean? And I know that some people are already doing that, but they're not as visible, right? We want to get those folks visible, and then we want that to set the tone for the future of games.
Yes, please. More stories and more games that are different and new. That sounds wonderful.
Yes.
Well, let's leave I'm going to keep going for a long time, but let's close the core topic for now. I might have you come back and we'll talk part two another time. But um, I have a question I like to ask everybody who comes on the show that's usually unrelated. It's my philosophical question that
Mm.
the middle of the social experiment I call a podcast. So I'm going to ask you, and let's see what you say. The question is, in my opinion, there's this magical space at the intersection of obviously story and game, but improv, comic books, film, all these things, where we can all just get along. There's a shared fellowship, a shared language. We just seem to come together naturally. If you agree with me on this theory of mine, and not everybody does, but if you do, what is the magical thread that holds that space together?
That holds the space together for everyone.
For everyone who naturally finds themselves at that intersection.
Hmm. I would want to say that that common thread is community. Um, because I found that to be so true no matter where I go, whether it's in games, out of games, um, whether that is um like in like bands. Like I listen to a lot of music, so like even like within like the music space, you have like community there, and it's all based in genre and subgenre. Um, so I feel like community is the common thread because no matter what, you can always find like somebody, even if that community is one more person and you're like the dynamic duo. I feel like that makes such a world of a difference, and you could really, I don't know, it's something beautiful about the human condition. Like for sure. I don't feel like we were made to be alone. And when two of us come together and then there's a community built around a common cause or something that we really love, like it really has a power and the potential to do so much good and really change people's lives too, to make them feel like they're not walking alone and that they have a dependable community to like lean on and like vent to and things like that. So yeah, I would say that would be the common thread for me. And I see it like very much alive in my life. It's like little clusters. If I could make a huge diagram of my life, it's like all these huge little clusters that sometimes they intersect and sometimes they don't, but they're in parallel. And people know people from the different clusters. And I feel like that's how it is with everyone. But that's just like what I think. I don't know
I,
if other people think that way too.
I've heard a whole bunch of answers, but I have heard a couple in the same vein. That's a beautiful answer. It's a great answer. Honestly, the animal is a social animal. You're completely correct. And our need to rely upon each other and connect with each other through things like stories and games. 100%. That's a fantastic answer. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Nobody's actually asked me that before. So thank you for that because I had to think a little bit.
That's honestly, that question is why I started the podcast, is I wanted to know, because I mean, I've read lots of books on the evolutionary roots of story and why humanity has used games to pass down knowledge and teach people things in a safe space known as the sacred circle or the magic circle.
Mm,
But I wanted to talk to people working in comics or writing novels or making tabletop games or developing digital games, find out in the real world what's happening there. So yeah,
yeah,
100%. Maybe someday I'll make a book out of it.
thank you. You should. I would read it.
Well, that's all the hard questions. I do like to open a little space here at the end for you to signal boost. Is there anything you're working on, anything you've done in the past you want to share, or where can people find you online, or what are you up to these days?
So I'm up to a lot of things. As a game designer, I have lots of passion projects that I just have never finished. And I'm still trying to like work through and see where I want to take it. So right now, currently, I'm working on like two passion projects. One of them is like in concept phase, and I have been designing this game for like 4 years, and I decided to deconstruct it again and start new. So I'm excited about where I'm taking the direction of that game. And then there's another game that I am working on that is an expansion, or rather, it's an iteration of the Game Jam game that I made, that I participated in with my partner earlier this year. There's a game jam in the games industry that happens every year called the Global Game Jam. And my partner and I have been participating every year for the last 6 years. And this year we felt like we really made a great game. And when we shared it out on socials, we got a lot of traction from a lot of people that said, you should keep working on this. This is really fun, really simple. But we can see it being something like a full-fledged game. So it was the first time that one of our games got that much great, good feedback. So we took it as a sign and we said, okay, like maybe we should, work on it some more and add a few new things. So we're doing that. And we're moving engines. So we built it in Unity and now we're moving into Unreal because we want to add a co-op element to it. And Unreal's multiplayer is nicer and easier to work with. So we're like migrating it. So it's a lot of work, but I'm excited about where all that stuff will go. And then with Latinx in gaming, Hispanic Heritage Month is coming on September. So we are going to be starting to plan what all of the programming looks like for that, which is really exciting. And hopefully it's just a time where we can celebrate our community amidst everything that's going on and giving them some hope, letting them know that they are loved and they are valued, and that we're here to support them in whatever way they need. So we're looking forward to the programming that comes out of that. and all the cool stuff that the community is going to do because they always join in on the programming. So it's always a call to action. So whether it's like speed running through games or showing off games that they've been making, or doing like arts and crafts, cooking. We have had all kinds of things as part of our Hispanic Heritage Month programming. So we're excited to see what this year will look like. And yes, when it comes to socials, for Latinx, if anybody is interested in what we do and the work that we are doing in the industry, you can find us at www.latinxingaming.com. And in there, you will find all the links to all of our socials. And we live in Discord. That's really where our community talks to a lot. We're fully international and bilingual. So in there, our Discord server, you can find it at discord.gd/Latinx. And that's where you can find our community. And then for me personally, if you would like to ping me about gameplay design or ask me how I got into games, if you have any questions about entering the games industry now, because that's really, really tough right now, or even if you want resources about game design or want to switch industries and don't know where to start, my DMs are always open. I'm really easy to find on LinkedIn. My name's just Elaine Gómez on there, and feel free to send me a DM or connect with me there. And also, I can pass along my email to you, Gerald, as well. People can reach out by email because I know some folks prefer a more of a private exchange in an email thread. So that's not a problem at all. And yes, I'm always available to help in whatever way I can because I started from nothing. I didn't have a mentor. I literally moved across the country with a little dream and like made it into a reality. And it's taken a lot of patience and grit to be here. It has not been easy. But I can definitely impart all of those things that I learned and the challenges that I face with people. So perhaps maybe they can avoid some of those pitfalls that I had to go through.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us today. This is fantastic. And I honestly, ping me when September. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help spread the word or boost the signal.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, we would love that. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun to chat about things that I love. Design, inclusion, Latinx, like all those things are I'm so passionate about it. And it's something that I do every single day. So it's nice to have a space to be able to talk about why it's important. And why it's something special that should continue to exist rather than just get bottled up because of reasons that I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, it has been my pleasure. I have a new tradition that I started this season where I let the guest have the last word of the show. So do you have any parting words of wisdom for us as I push you out the door?
Yes, my parting words would be kind, stay true to who you are, and no matter what's going on in the world, just know that a smile can go a long way.
And that wraps up yet another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Elaine, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insight into inclusive designs was both inspiring and educational. It's clear that indie devs have a real opportunity to lead the way in designing with intention, equity, and heart. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow along, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and hey, come join us on Discord and get some people talking. Until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner Story and Game.